started. Thank you for coming today, and on behalf of the Hanson Library Foundation, the sponsor of today's activity, welcome. I am honored to also welcome Kathleen Teahan and thank her for visiting our library today.
Thank you.
It's very much appreciated. Kathleen Teahan is a former Massachusetts State Representative, a retired teacher, and the author of The Cookie Love Round the World, the story of the chocolate chip cookie. Kathleen's goal is to leave a better world for her grandchildren and children throughout the world, and that's a quote. Kathy has demonstrated her commitment to this goal by serving on the Whitman School Committee, volunteering in classrooms, food programs, scholarship committees, and several outreach programs, including Habitat for Humanity. A portion of the sale of each of her book goes to fight world hunger. After Kathy's talk, her book will be available for sale and signing. Purchase price of $13 each, which is a discounted price. And we ask you to write out what you'd like on the book, if you'd like it personalized on a little piece of paper, so we're sure to get all the spelling right. So please help me welcome Kathy Teahan.
Thank you, Linda. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Linda Wall very much, and I had the honor of working with her daughter Ashley, because Ashley volunteered at the State House when I was a state rep, and what a wonderful young woman, and you know, we were very lucky to have her. I'd like to thank Karen Stolfer, the director of the library, and all the trustees for all the work that you do for libraries, because libraries are so important. I wouldn't have the information that I needed for my book if it weren't for libraries, historical societies who kept records of all these things that happened, because unfortunately this beautiful building, which is the restaurant that we're going to be talking about today, had a bad fire in 1984, and so the building is gone. But does anybody know in Whitman there is a restaurant where this Toll House restaurant used to be, and there's only a sign there? Do you know what it's near?
Wendy's.
Right, Wendy's. So if you ride by Wendy's going someplace, think of what used to be there in the corner, and it was this beautiful restaurant. And we're going to tell you a little bit about this restaurant in a few minutes. But how many people have ever had a Toll House chocolate chip cookie? Or a chocolate chip cookie, just chocolate chip cookie is a Toll House chocolate chip cookie. How many people have that cookie as your favorite kind of cookie? I know. Well, it's a very special cookie to us because it was invented at this restaurant in Whitman, and Whitman-Hanson is one school district, so we're really one community. When I worked in Boston and I was a state rep, people thought my town was Whitman-Hanson, so they introduced me as this is the rep from Whitman-Hanson. So it was created in your community, so it's something that you get to be very proud of. So I have a few other questions just about cookies. Does anybody know how many chocolate chip cookies are eaten in the United States every year? It's quite a big number. Anybody want to take a guess? What do you think? 1,000? Even more than 1,000?
100.
Even more than 1,000,000? More than 100?
600.
What comes after? That's how many? A dozen and a billion? A million? That's, oh, 10,000 and a million? They're getting closer, but it's actually 7 billion every year. So we eat a lot of cookies in this country. And in the Guinness Book of World Records, there is a record for the biggest chocolate chip cookie ever made. Anybody want to guess how many pounds that cookie weighed?
200.
Yeah.
100 pounds.
100, more, and you said 200, even more. 200 is a big cookie. Yeah?
1,000.
You're getting closer, so how many thousand? What do you think?
2,000?
Even more? You want to say bigger than 2,000?
5,000.
If you take 5,000 and you multiply that times 8. Yeah, 40,000 pounds. It was huge. The diameter was 102 feet, and they built it, an oven outside, I think, around the cookie batter. So it was the Immaculate Bakery in North Carolina, and they have the record, and they cooked this huge, huge cookie, like bigger than this room. It was much bigger than this room. And then they cut it into pieces and boxed it and sold it. And they raised $20,000 for a folk arts museum in North Carolina. So this cookie has had a lot of history, and a lot of things have happened ever since it was invented 81 years ago. Anybody in this room who is 81 years old or older? Oh, we have a few people who were 81 or older, so they were alive when this very first chocolate chip cookie was born, but most of us weren't. So before these ladies were born, there was no such thing as the chocolate chip cookie, because it was invented in 1937 at this restaurant. And I wrote a story about it because, two reasons. One, because some third graders asked me to make it the state cookie of Massachusetts, which they did, and we do have it as our state cookie. And another reason is because I'm very proud of the history of Whitman and the people who lived there and worked at the Toll House, and Mrs. Wakefield. When Mrs. Wakefield graduated from college, she went to Framingham Normal School, which is now Framingham State University, where you learn a lot about nutrition, food, design, how to design clothing, and you learn about lots of other things too, about becoming teachers and scientists, but their specialty was nutrition and design. So Mrs. Wakefield, whose name was Ruth Graves, graduated there in 1924. Then she married her husband, Ken, and this is when they were a bit older, but they got married, and Ken was working in Brockton, which is right near us, and he was working in a meat packing factory, and he was doing the sales, and Ruth was teaching school at Brockton High School, and she was doing cooking demonstrations in some of the department stores. But they had a dream that they wanted to open a restaurant because she loved to cook. She had already written some cookbooks, and she wanted to open a restaurant. So they saved all their money, and they took out a mortgage, and they bought this old house that was on the corner of Bedford Street, Route 14 and Route 18, and I'll pass this picture around. And this is what it looked like when they bought it for $6,500, but we'll pass it around and it can go all the way to the back, and you can see what it looked like. And it had a Toll House sign out front. So they spent a lot of money to fix up the building because it was old, and they named it Toll House. Has anybody ever gone through a toll booth where you had to pay money on a road?
No.
No, you haven't? You know what? They're doing away with them all. But you still have to pay, but now you have like this automatic thing that registers that you went through. Things have changed a lot, but stagecoaches used to go down Route 18 because people would go from Boston to New Bedford because there was a big whaling industry in New Bedford, big business. So lots of stagecoaches went, and on the way, they'd stop and change horses at this toll booth in Whitman, and people would go to this little old building, an inn, and have something to eat while they were changing the horses. So that's why the Wakefields named it the Toll House, because of the toll booth. Okay, so this is the book that I wrote about the cookie. What do you see on the front of the cover? Can anybody tell me one thing you see? What do you see?
It's a cookie. I know a cookie.
You see what? Okay, you see Massachusetts, right? There's the map of Massachusetts. Why do you think we put Massachusetts on?
Because it was made.
Right? It was invented in Massachusetts. Any other reason why we'd have Massachusetts? Yep.
I'm just gonna say there's a cookie that has that holding a flag that says Whitman on it.
Right, there's a cookie that's holding a flag that has Whitman on it. And these are the flags, the pennants that sometimes you have at colleges and towns because you're proud of them, and people wave them if they're in a parade or something to celebrate their schools. So does the cookie, what kind of emotion or feeling do you think the cookie has?
Happy.
Happy, a very happy feeling, because the cookie's very proud that he's the cookie of Massachusetts, but cookies make us happy. Sometimes when we're feeling kind of down, somebody might give us a cookie to make us cheer up and feel better, and they send cookies to people who are away from home, who might be lonesome. So cookies make us happy, and this cookie has made a lot of people happy. Okay, so anything else you see besides? What do you think these lines are?
Where they were shipped to.
Yep, where they were shipped to, and they look just like lasers because it's going all around the world. It's going to Africa, it's going to Great Britain, and because these cookies have gone all over the world, they don't just stay with us. So, when I wrote this book, I had an editor helping me with ideas and suggestions, and she said, you need a narrator because this is going to be a historic fiction. Almost all of it is true, but little parts we put in that weren't exactly true. So she said, you need a narrator. So, excuse me. So this is my real mother and my aunts and uncles. And my uncle Bob Mahoney still lives in Whitman. But two of my aunts, Agnes and Ann, worked at the Toll House. They were waitresses there, and I worked there later. And I was a salad girl making salads. How many people like salad?
I didn't like salad.
You like salad? I love salad. It's one of my favorite foods. And Hadley, my assistant back there, likes salad.
Daddy likes salad.
The daddy does too. It's so healthy and so good. So, the narrator, the person telling the story, even though I have the words, is my Aunt Ann. And we actually look a lot alike. And the person who did the illustrations for this book is Larissa Hart. Her name's on the front. She never illustrated a book before, but my friend, Debbie Poole Anderson, owns the Whitman Hanson Express, and I was looking for an illustrator, and she said, let me introduce you to Larissa because she's a great graphic designer. We met each other, she did a few sketches, and we decided to start this project together. So it was a big learning experience for all of us. But she's such a good artist, and she does more than just draw pictures. She puts her heart and soul into it, so she gets the feeling and the meaning that you want across to the readers. So she did a picture of my aunt from a photograph, and she did this. So my Aunt Ann tells the story, and then the cookie was invented in 1937. The restaurant opened in 1930, and that was during the Great Depression. Other restaurants were closing because people didn't have jobs. They had all lost their jobs, and there were terrible storms out west, and the stock market crashed. So it was a really hard time. People didn't have work. So what in this picture shows that they might have been having a hard time? Can you see anything?
Their clothes.
Okay, what's on their clothes?
Patches.
Yep, patches on their clothes. What else might make you think they were having a hard time?
The house it looks dirty.
Yeah, it looks kind of shadowy, dirty. Yep, it's not bright and shiny.
They have a yellow.
Yep, there's all yellow. What else?
Their faces.
Their faces, yes, they have very serious, concerned faces. Yep, what else?
Their stands have lots of patches on them.
Yes, they do, because when you have a hole in it, you don't want to show the hole, so you put a patch. Yep, anything else?
Their dolls.
Right, what's the doll? Is it like a doll you have?
No.
It's not like an American Girl doll, is it? No, it's made out of straw. And one woman that I was talking to said her grandmother used to make dolls out of socks and sell them at the shipyard to make money for the family. Like people were doing all different kinds to make money because they didn't have their jobs. Okay, what else?
It looks kind of empty.
Yeah, it's empty. The shelves don't have much as far as food and stuff. Yep.
Where faces look sad.
Yes, they certainly do. And what's coming out of the faucet?
Nothing.
Nothing except a,
One drop.
right, one drop. So it might be leaking and they don't have enough money to fix it. So when my grandfather lost his job, all the family had to help to make money. So the kids had to do things. So my aunt, who's the real person in the picture, and my uncle, the real person in the picture, sold newspapers every Sunday at Holy Ghost Church in Whitman, and that money wasn't for them to spend, it was to pay the bills. The other thing, my grandmother had a frying pan like this one. It's called a cast iron frying pan, but hers was probably 6 times bigger than this, a lot bigger. And she made 60 dozen donuts every Saturday, and they sold them for a nickel a dozen. They sold them to bakeries, and then they sold them to neighbors, and that helped pay the bills too. And the kids went around the neighborhood with their wagon, and they sold the donuts, and then they each got to have 5 cents, which was a lot of money in those days.
Oh.
Yeah.
A newspaper.
Yes, it was
What's that newspaper?
the newspaper. It was the Boston Daily Globe. So it had a little different from what it is now. So in the story, we also talk about how we're not in a depression now, but people in the world and even in the United States don't always have enough food to be healthy and to do well. So we need to think about those people and do things to help them. So $1 from every book is going to go to help feed people who don't have enough food. So I asked Hadley, my granddaughter, who helped me set up this morning, what do you think the kids would be most interested in the book? And she said, how the cookie was invented. I said, yep, I guess that would be it. So what happened, and you know what? There's been things on television, on Channel 5 and Channel 4 about the invention. Well, I talked to Ruth Wakefield's daughter twice, and she said, what I have in the book about running out of walnuts is the true story of what happened. Her mother might have written the recipe while she was on an airplane, but it was because they were out of walnuts. So one day at this restaurant, the baker came to Mrs. Wakefield. What time of the day was it? Can you tell by what's in the window?
Sunny.
Sunny day, so it's early in the morning when the sun's coming up. So she said, Mrs. Wakefield, what are we going to do? We have a wedding tomorrow. We're supposed to make our special cookies, which are the buttered dewdrop cookies, and we don't have any walnuts. She said, we're having a tough time. We didn't have any sugar last week. We've been having shortages of everything. And Mrs. Wakefield looked around the kitchen and she started thinking, this is a problem. We have to solve the problem. And what she spied over on the counter was a block of chocolate that was this size. This box comes with 20 pounds of books to my house, but she had 25 pounds of chocolate in a big chunk in the kitchen. So she went to the chocolate and she had an ice pick, which was bigger than this, but I have this little ice pick, and she just picked off some little pieces, and they put that in the cookie batter instead of the walnuts, and they baked them.
Chocolate.
Voila, yep, you got chocolate chip cookies. All of a sudden, there were chocolate chip cookies, and those were the very first ones in 1937.
What's in that box?
Right now, books, not chocolate. So, they These are some other pictures of what people did when they didn't have a lot of money. They grew their own food. They had gardens everywhere, and if they lived in the city, there was a patch of grass between the sidewalk and the road, and they planted vegetables and things in that patch, and they ate dandelions. They made soup or sandwiches out of the dandelion greens. And I just saw on television the other day with the guy who talks about the produce, I forget his name, but you can buy dandelion greens in stores now because they're realizing how much nutrition's in them. You know? So, Mrs. Wakefield and Bernice, the cook, made their cookies. They passed them out to everybody in the restaurant, and everybody liked them. And from that day on, there were chocolate chip cookies. But the cookies were just famous at the Toll House. But in 1938, they had a Betty Crocker cooking school of the air on the radio, and she gave the recipe and told about it, so it became popular. And it started to get more popular. And Mrs. Wakefield said to Mr. Nestle's, you know, Nestle's who makes the chocolate chips, she said, "It's taking my workers too long to chip chocolate off this huge chunk. What can you do to make it faster and easier?" So she was thinking all the time, how do I solve problems? And Nestle's came up with, excuse me, a scored bar that was probably quite a bit bigger than this, but it was flat like this, like a candy bar, and it was scored, and it had all these little places where you could cut it into small pieces, and you can take a look at that. So Nestle's invented that for her because she had that idea. And then a few years later, Nestle's invented the Nestle's chocolate chips that we buy. And if you look on the package the next time, there's the Toll House restaurant. And on the back, it says the original Toll House cookie recipe, but it's not the original Toll House cookie recipe. And I'm really glad that she didn't give them the original because she sold the trademark and the rights to the name and the recipe to Nestle's for $1 and a lifetime supply of chocolate, which, you know, at that time she probably thought that was a good deal. But when you think of what Nestle's has made in profits because of it, so you can pass this around and see the restaurant on the package. So, and when they first sold the chips, they came in 2 bags of 7 ounces each for 25 cents for 2 bags. So prices were a lot different then. So, and if you want to find the original recipe, if you Google Channel 5 Maria Stefanos and original Toll House recipe, it will come on because Pat Gaquin, whose mother Peg Gaquin worked at the Toll House, and her grandmother Susan Brides was the baker at the Toll House. They have it written out in their own cookbook, so they gave it to Channel 5, so it's online and you can get the original. And they didn't use butter, which makes sense. It was during the Depression, so they used shortening and just different variations of the amounts of sugar and flour and things. So, oh, and the Toll House restaurant, you can't really see it in this picture, but they had a tree in the middle of the garden room that grew, and they built the room around the tree, and you could see the tree sticking right through the top of the roof of the restaurant. And you can see that in this picture. You can see the tree with some ivy on it. And in the picture with the tree, you can pass that around if you want, Mr. and Mrs. Duncan Hines, who visited the Toll House. Some other famous people who visited the Toll House were a reporter named Ernie Pyle, who was writing before the war, before World War II, and then during World War II he was over in the Pacific. But he wrote 3 columns about this restaurant, and it went in columns of newspapers around the country. And he said there's probably 1,000 reasons for Ruth Wakefield's success, but the #1 that he believed was she never cheated anybody, she never scrimped on anything. She wanted people to have a quality meal in a beautiful setting, and she made sure that she did that all the time. So Couple other things. We have, do you know how this cookie got to be our state cookie? We had a contest with the Fig Newton. And even the governor, Governor Weld, wanted the Fig Newton to be the state cookie. But anybody hear the story of how it got to be the state cookie? Well, there were third graders who lived in Somerset, Massachusetts. And these third graders did a big unit with all their subjects, math, music, art, history, and they voted on the favorite cookie of the school. Toll House won, so their senator was visiting them, and he said, I challenge you to make this the state cookie of Massachusetts. So other third graders made a bug, our state bug. Anybody know what the state bug of Massachusetts is? Ladybug. And it was a third grade class who did that. And we have a state bird. Anybody know what the state bird is?
Bald eagle.
A what? Bald eagle? Well, that's our country's. Yeah, that's, you're right for our country. Yep, right. Chickadee is our state bird. Anybody know what our state berry is? They grew them around here. Right, cranberries. So we didn't have a state cookie till 1997, and these third graders came in, and they came to the State House. Has anybody ever been to the State House? It's a beautiful building with a golden dome, and you can go on tours there anytime. They're free, and it's beautiful, and you can learn how we get our laws. So we were in a committee hearing, because I was a representative, and in this committee, we talked about how Massachusetts invests their money. We talked about public bidding laws for building libraries and town halls. We talked about making smoking unlawful in public buildings. And we also talked about making the chocolate chip cookie the state cookie. And when the third graders came in, they had to give their arguments in a debate and the reasons why it would be the state cookie. And what won the contest was one of the third grade girls said, did anyone ever come home and say, oh, Mom, you cooked some Fig Newtons today? And she said, no. And all the reps agreed that everybody in Massachusetts and was very proud of this cookie, and people were very happy whenever somebody was making chocolate chip cookies for them. Oh, somebody else came down to join. So it became our state cookie. But another thing that happened during World War II, when people didn't have much money, Nestle's wanted to still make some money, so they came up with this idea, and they had a big promotion. They had posters and things, and said, while your husbands and brothers and loved ones are across the ocean fighting and risking their lives to keep us safe, the patriotic duty of women is to send chocolate chip cookies to those people overseas. And that's how the first care packages started, and women did that. And veterans have told me that when a package came to anybody, all their buddies followed them back into the barracks or the tent or wherever they were going. And they were hoping that their friends would share chocolate chip cookies with them, which they did. I think probably most of them did anyway. But one last thing, when I was doing the research, I Googled Julia Child and Ruth Wakefield. Anybody know who Julia Child is? Well, Julia Child is a very famous cook, like Ruth Wakefield is. And Julia Child did all kinds of French cooking, and she learned, and there's a movie called Julia and Julia, I think? Julie and Julia, which is a real good movie, and you can watch it to learn about Julia Child. So when I Googled them, so on the Google search came up a book, 365 People Who Changed the World, and in that book is Ruth Wakefield. So she's in there with Mother Teresa, Michelangelo, Tesla, all kinds of people who have made huge impacts on the world. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how did Ruth Wakefield get in that? But then after I thought about it and the more research I did, she not only did the cookies, but she did a lot for charities, for colleges, to help people. And she adopted her own children, and then she supported the orphanage. I think she helped waitresses sometimes if their families were having some hard times and things. So she did a lot, and I think that the cookie has made a lot of people happy, and we need to be doing more things to be making people happy. So she belongs in that book about people who changed the world. So thank you, and if you have any questions, thanks. Thank you very much. But anybody have a question or a comment that you, yeah?
Sorry, I missed, why is that not the original recipe on the back?
Well, she gave that to Nestle's,
Yeah.
but it wasn't her individual. The original recipe had shortening in it because during the Depression they couldn't get enough butter.
Right.
And it had, she puts the batter in the refrigerator, covers it, and put it in the refrigerator overnight. She didn't put that in.
Oh, okay, so she just didn't.
Yeah, she put in just different variations of, and yes, she was smarter than the company is. Any other questions? Do you have a question? Do you have a question?
Why do we eat cookies?
Why do we eat cookies? Anybody want to answer that question?
I would.
What? Why do we eat cookies?
I think my sister has a different restaurant, and she just sells sandwiches.
Oh, really? She has her very own restaurant? That's very exciting. Well, I hope her restaurant takes off like this one. And that's the thing, that the Wakefields followed their dreams, and we all can have dreams, and you never know how it's going to work out. Okay.
And my brother does cookies too.
He does?
Yes, my brother's in another state.
Oh, wow, and he makes cookies? Okay, so we want to know why people eat cookies. Okay. Because they're yummy. I think that's right. Any other comments or questions?
She does.
Okay. One more back there, and then we'll get back to you. Excuse me. You know what? People have asked me that, and I didn't think of it because I didn't know the original recipe when I was doing the book. But I'm going to make a new bookmark that will have a picture of the restaurant and the original, recipe, and we'll stick that in the books. But yeah, because we definitely need that. All right. Then what was your question?
Why is there those red stuff?
Those red things. If you ever ride on an airplane, while you're riding on an airplane, there's a little screen and it shows you these flight patterns where the airplane's going. And so this is where the cookie went, all over the world. All right, well, I think that the library has more cookies that people can enjoy, and I'll be glad to sign any books if anybody would like to buy a book. And you have one more question. The whole book? I'm not going to because it would take too long, but you can either take the book out of the library to read the book. I told you the story, but I didn't read it word for word. But thanks. All right, thank you. And you can come up and look at the pictures.
Hello, I'm Hanson Fire Chief Jerry Thompson, and I'd like to talk to you today about some ice safety tips. This is the time of year when our residents like to go out on lakes and ponds to ice skate or ice fish, but it can be a very dangerous time of year as nobody is able to tell if the ice is 100% safe. However, we know that people are going to go out on the ice to enjoy themselves during the winter months. So here's some tips in the event you want to go out there. You should never go alone. In the event that you fall through, somebody there might be able to help you. In the event that you do fall through, there's a couple things that you can do. It's called reach, throw, and go. So if somebody falls through, the person that's with them can either reach for them without going in the water or the ice to try to get them out. They can throw an object, whether it be a stick or anything nearby for them to grab and hold on to, and then they need to go immediately and call 911 to get help. We have the equipment and the suits available that allow us to go into the ice and rescue somebody. I hope these tips were helpful for you and that you have a safe winter.